Christopher Hitchens was one of the world's great wordsmiths. Across his long and rich career, his essays in written and spoken English proved that words can be weapons. He was a contrarian who tilted at religion, politics and literature with enormous intellect and wit. Love him or hate him, you couldn't ignore him. He died today at 62, losing his final argument with cancer. In tribute, here he is in conversation with Late Line's Tony Jones.
It's very good to see you.
Tony.
You've talked about crossing a border into the land of malady. What is that like?
Well, for me personally, it was a bit like being deported, in that I woke up in New York, having gone to bed feeling more or less okay, during a very grueling book tour, and I woke in the morning thinking I was actually dying. The whole liquid sac, the pericardium as it's called, around my heart had just filled up. It was as if my whole chest cavity had been crammed with wet cement. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. And I managed to call the emergency services, and these wonderful New Yorkers arrived, but so very heavily armed and with sort of cuffs and torches and boots. And I remember thinking idly as they loaded me into the ambulance, why do they need all this for one stricken civilian? It was a bit like being arrested and deported. And in fact, in their kindly way, they were escorting me across the frontier, from the land of the well into the land of the very ill indeed.
How do you feel about the people who are praying for you?
It seems to me a bit crass to be trying to talk to people about conversion when you know they're ill. The whole idea of hovering over a sick person who's worried and perhaps in discomfort and saying now's the time to reconsider strikes me as opportunist at the very best, and has a very bad history in the past.
It's almost inevitable, isn't it, when a famous atheist faces death, that this will happen.
There's something fishy to me in the suggestion that, okay, now that your system is breaking down, wouldn't it be a good moment for you to repudiate the convictions of a lifetime? Again, there's something about the underlying assumption there that I want to resist.
Let's talk briefly about that day, September 11, 2001.
Yes.
You described it very tellingly soon afterwards, if not on the day, as it being as if Charles Manson had been made God for a day.
I think about it every day, still.
One of the more remarkable things that happened in the aftermath was the reaction of some on the left, and I'm sure this rather helped helped galvanise the transformation that you were already undergoing.
Once I'd sorted out my various impressions of the day, which I had in common with everyone else, and which also included the realisation that a friend of mine had just been flown into the walls of the Pentagon, I felt, with that additional horror, much as everyone else did, you had to go work through shock, rage, fear, not so much, oddly enough. I mean, I didn't feel I was frightened by it, but I was very powerfully shaken by it. It's a summons of a sort. It's, okay, now, if you don't recognize this as a crisis, when would you recognize one? And I remember thinking of Noam Chomsky, Michael Moore, Howard Zinn, and a few others. They would find a way of explaining this away. I wasn't prepared to tolerate that.
It's interesting because your memoir, you talk about mutating from one identity to another. Are you trying to deal once and for all with your reasons for moving away from the left?
Yes, I suppose I am. But I'm trying to do it in such a way as not to seem to follow, or indeed to follow at all, a script that I think everyone knows in their mind. That's, roughly speaking, you know, people are sort of idealistic lefties when they're young, and then they become paunchy and compromised and cynical, and they become more conservative. I don't know how I look to other people or how I sound or how I seem on the page, but I think I'd have a fair chance of beating that cliché rap. Not a reactionary. I've never been any kind of conservative.
You've written for decades, day in, day out. I think you said at least 1,000 words a day for many, many years, dispatches, articles, lectures, books, in particular books. Doesn't it give you some comfort that your thoughts and indeed some version of you is going to exist after your death is imperishable.
One of the most sour reflections that I have when I think that I'm 61 now and I might not make 65, I quite easily might not. One of the bitter aspects of that is, well, I put in 60 years sort of at the coalface. I worked very hard. In the last few years, I've got a fair amount of recognition for it. In my opinion, actually, rather more than I deserve. Certainly more than I expected. And I could have looked forward to a few years of, shall we say, cruising speed, you know, just as it were, relishing that, enjoying it, not ceasing to work, not resting on the laurels, but savouring it a bit. And that, I was just getting ready for that, as a matter of fact. I was hit right at the top of my form, right in the middle of a successful book tour. I'm not going to get that, and that does upset me. The thought of mortality, in other words, of being outlived, is fine when it's your children, your books, or your trees, but it doesn't reconcile you to an early death. No, it doesn't.